Well, I did want to go right ahead and concentrate on these two ideas, one from Jaspers and one from Heidegger. Uh, Both of them seem to be prompted by this remark. This is at the bottom of page 116 by Heidegger. To exist as a human being means to be exposed to nothingness. We are familiar with this idea. This is very close to what Jonas meant by the burden of mortality, the constant exposure to nothingness. I suppose the difference is how do these three thinkers, the difference between these three thinkers is in how they respond to that basic fact. Um, well, if we continue on here, on page 117, nothingness precedes, envelops, and conditions all being. In the experience of dread, and that's a very central idea here, which is Kierkegaard's idea that has been taken up by later thinkers. Kierkegaard, the great 19th century Danish philosopher, Danish Christian philosopher, who thought that the experience of dread was the essential human experience. Dread, the particular experience of being faced with the inevitable, being faced with doom, being faced with failure, and coming to terms with it, I suppose. In the experience of dread, we are confronted with the hidden truth that there is no ultimate consolation, that the end of all striving is shipwreck, the abyss of non-being. And this idea of shipwreck is Jasper's idea. It is hard to discover this truth, harder still to face it and live by it. Weak natures never know this mood of dread at all, Kierkegaard insisted. And the German existentialists hold that even the strongest of it know it rarely, because we are chiefly creatures of comfort, not seekers of truth. That's a very important thought and a very challenging thought. The idea is that as human beings, we are creatures of comfort, not seekers of truth, which means we have to force ourselves to do philosophy sometimes. Because the philosophy is the search after truth, and sometimes the truth is very, very disturbing. There's every reason to kind of avoid the truth. Your personal truth about your life, the political truth of America at this point, and the world. Every day in the modern world is a matter of finding out how much you want to accept, about contemporary politics or the contemporary environmental situation. If you choose to look at the world and stare at it, and it can be very, very disconcerting. Well, the existentialists are telling us it's always been like that for human beings, because the fundamental truth of human existence is that we are constantly being faced with non-existence. That death is right there all the time. That we are never safe. This is a very interesting part here. Our true condition is one of exposure. In reality, we are defenseless, naked to the winds of chance and blind accident. There is an expressive German participle, geborgen, which translates into English as secure or safe, but connotes the delightful feeling of protectedness, the comfort of being hidden away or concealed from lurking dangers. He continues, though the desire for protection and security for Geborgenheit is a characteristic and primary impulse of human creatures, it is also a profound illusion. That is, the notion that we can ever really be safe and secure as human beings is a profound illusion. It's a delusion, really. Spiritually, we are all exposed to the yawning abyss, the primal night, which originates all, and to which we all return. I don't know, it's a little dramatic there, but I think there's something quite true about that. We seek to be safe and secure. It's a psychological need that most of us have really deeply. I know I have it. And so we have to make a decision at a certain point whether we want to maintain that false sense of security of Geborgenheit, or whether we want to look at the world in a truthful way, whether we want to accept the truth of the world, whether we want to accept the truth of our existence. Now, Jaspers had this idea that the way that we sort of find out about ourselves in the deepest way is when we run into these boundary situations. This idea of the boundary situation, and we can certainly anticipate that death will be the ultimate boundary situation. It's the, as this is a quote from here on page 118 from Jaspers, Carl Jaspers. The boundary situations are, from the point of view of our everyday living, final. They cannot be seen beyond. These are the ultimate limits of life, the negativities, as Joseph Margolis called them. In our existence, we see nothing behind them. They are like a wall against which we push, against which we wreck. They are not to be changed by us, but only brought to clarity. That is, we can't change these ultimate inevitabilities, but we can understand them. We can come to clarity about them if we choose, right, to leave our safety zone. Now, it's not just death. What is it? Guilt? Yes. Jaspers says guilt, suffering, conflict, chance, and death. These are the typical boundary situations. Interestingly, a very interesting idea. Take, for existence, suffering, physical and mental suffering. There's no getting around it. You're going to experience it. You're going to experience physical suffering in your life, and you're going to experience mental, or we can call it spiritual suffering, and there's nothing you can do about it. But bad things are going to happen to you, and when they happen to you, you try to cope with them, of course, but you can't unmake them. You can't go back in time and change the reality of the situation. If you break your leg, or you hurt your back, or you have chronic pain, or something happens in your life, and say you're grieving, or grieving over a death of a loved one, or grieving over a loss of a job, or the end of a relationship, these things are realities, and you simply have to acknowledge them. There's nothing you can do about them. All you can do is sort of live through them. Guilt is another interesting boundary experience where we come up against necessity. What is guilt? Guilt is our feelings that things that we did in the past were terrible and we would rather not have done them. Well, the thing is, they're in the past. They cannot be undone. So if you feel guilty about something, yes, you can cope with it. You can deal with it, but you can't change whatever it was that made you feel guilty in the first place, because it's in the past, and the past cannot be changed. That's why it's a boundary situation. And finally, death. This is the second sense of mortality, the one that Jonas said was a blessing, and I think that existentialists would definitely take issue with that. Death is something that cannot be seen beyond. It is the ultimate limit of life. From the atheist position, and I think Heidegger and Jaspers are both taking, generally speaking, an atheist position. That is, if there was an afterlife, then it would be an entirely different experience, right? Because it's the acknowledgement of death is what they're advocating. But what does it mean to acknowledge death in the full truth of death? Well, I think we can sort of move over to Heidegger when he says that death, the human existence itself, is a being towards death, and that's the Heidegger idea. I hope I can find it. Maybe a little bit farther on in the essay, he talks a lot more about Jaspers. Where is it? I'm sorry. It appears somewhere in this discussion. Very, very famous. Very, very famous idea from Heidegger that human existence itself is a being towards death. I can't find it, but I'm sure it's there. You'll find it. Why would he say such a thing? Well, let me do one more video, and we'll concentrate on that idea, which is so important. I'll find it, and we'll concentrate on it. It's important not only because it's probably the most powerful idea that comes out of this essay, that human existence itself is, in its essence, a being towards death. That is a death has to be taken into account in the very definition of human existence. It also, in terms of this class, is quite important because when we begin to read Paul Landsberg, his whole philosophy can, in a sense, be read as a response to Heidegger and as an attempt to refute the definition of human existence as a being. This video here and just do one more about this idea.